Oh, Jake Cal's here. Hello, Jake Cal.
Hey, how are you?
Thanks for showing up.
I've been here the whole time. I was just having some of these beautiful salted roasted pistachios. The only problem is when I went to the store, I kid you not, there was a shelf of these. All flavors available except one flavor.
Salt and vinegar.
Sea salt and
The
vinegar.
We moved the market.
I am not kidding. I go to the fancy, bespoke.
The Rayleighs? You went to the Rayleighs in Truckee?
I went to the Rayleighs in Truckee, the artisanal, and they have, all these overpriced.
First of all, it's called artisanal.
That's what I said. The art stuff, the artistic food, the artisanal row where they had this. I kid you not, spicy, salty, no salt, every shelf packed. Then there's one shelf I can see straight through to the ice cream.
But not sea salt and vinegar.
And I look at the tiny little sign, salt and vinegar, shelled nuts.
Sea salt and vinegar.
Sea salt and vinegar. Chamots, shelled nuts. Sold out across the country.
I cannot recommend these more highly. They're incredible.
You can't recommend your salty nuts more.
They are delicious. My salty nuts are delicious.
Let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sack.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, Besties. Queen of Quinoa.
Did you see Joe Manchin's high heater op-ed in the Wall Street Journal?
Uh-oh.
Oh my God.
Yep. Joe Manchin went for it.
Joe Manchin's running for president.
He is. I think, okay, so let me ask Sachs right there. Sachs, Joe Manchin, Nikki Haley, and who's the guy from Florida?
What's your question?
By the way, there's a big
DeSantis.
defection that was leaked this week. Ron Lauder flipped from Trump to DeSantis. That's a big one because Lauder's good for a lot of money, 5 to 10 million at least.
Joe Manchin, what impact would he have coming into the race? I'm not trolling you. Looking for your honest opinion.
Well, it depends how he comes in. What did he say in the op-ed?
He was talking about the insincerity of the Biden administration to control costs and how everybody was incompetent. And it certainly there's some waste and we can control some spending and everybody needs to grow up and get in a room and just manage the budget for the American people and stop playing politics.
Yeah, I think the headline of the article, actually, to your point, Jacob, was much worse than the substance of the article, Sachs. But if you see the headline, I don't know, Nick, if you can just throw it up there, it was brutal. The headline and the byline of the article, I think, was more damaging than the substance of the article.
Biden's Inflation Reduction Act betrayal. Instead of implementing the law as intended, his administration subverts it for ideological ends.
I have to think that Joe was responsible for that, for the titling of that article.
He would get permission to approve it.
Right.
In a byline
and
like
by
this.
the way, I think if you guys remember, we talked about this when that act was first published. And if you guys remember, I think I pulled up the CBO data, the CBO model, and it showed for the first 5 years, this thing burns $200 billion. And then there's some expectation that there'll be some sudden boom in revenue in the out years. And then you make the money back in the out years. So it's total like accounting shenanigans for him to have made the claim in the first place that the IRA was actually going to be like a net deficit reduction or debt reduction. In fact, it's all just accounting shenanigans and it's just a massive spend package, particularly in the near term when it matters most.
I think I told you guys this, but I think this was like, when was the last time I was in Washington? Probably, March now? So maybe it was January I was there. And I saw Schumer and Mark Warner, and I spent about 2 hours with Manchin. He is really impressive. He's cool, he's interesting, he's thoughtful, he's moderate. Manchin's like a formidable guy. So this will be really interesting if he steps in there and tries to take on
between Nikki
Biden.
Haley and Manchin, where do you write your check?
I'd probably write a check to both, to be honest.
Feels like a good ticket to me. I've always wanted to see the cross-party
Could you
ticket.
imagine a Democrat and Republican merging somehow and like running together?
It would be the greatest.
Oh my God.
I've been pitching that for years. I think that's like a clear path.
David Freeberg may have just come up with one of the most disruptive ideas in American politics that's ever been floated. Oh
Manchin,
my God.
Haley. Manchin, Haley? Haley, Manchin.
Keep dreaming.
Manchin, Haley, yeah.
Just my comment on this. So first of all, I remember when, Manchin did a good job stopping Biden's $3.5 trillion Build Back Better. Remember, it was him and Sinema that were the holdouts.
Yep.
But then Manchin compromised and gave Biden a $750 billion version of it. And I guess now he's complaining that Biden didn't live up to his end of the bargain in doing the deficit reduction. But quite frankly, many commentators said at the time that the bill's claims to deficit reduction were preposterous and that would never happen. So quite frankly, Manchin shouldn't have been euchred or hoodwinked by Biden. Everyone was basically saying there'll never be any deficit reduction out of this bill. It's just more spending. So I don't really feel bad for Manchin here saying that somehow he was betrayed by Biden. He should have known better. Now, in terms of him running, yeah, I think as a Democrat who's figured out how to get himself elected in West Virginia, which is a plus 20 red state, he obviously knows how to appeal to the center. The problem for him is just how do you get the Democratic Party nomination? Because he's far to the right of your average Democratic Party voter. If he wants to run as an independent, that's a different story. And that would really throw a curveball into the race. But I don't see him doing that. I think it's kind of a stretch. And this is the problem with a lot of these fantasy candidates is that, centrist or moderate voters might like them, but they can't get the nomination of their party. And unless
you mean like Trump and Obama? Those were fantasy candidates.
I don't think so. I mean,
Trump was not a fantasy candidate. He's the ultimate.
Well, he was an outsider, but he appealed to the base of the party. He appealed to the base of the party. What I'm saying is in order to get the nomination of a major party, you have to appeal to its base. And I don't think Manchin appeals to the base of the Democratic Party. He's out of step with it. He's out of step with it in ways that I like. Don't get me wrong. But I don't see how he's going to get a nomination.
Chris Christie, what do you think of him? He seems like he's about to come in the race too, David.
Pointless.
He's viable?
Pointless.
He's just clutter.
Okay.
Pointless.
All right. Listen, everybody. Welcome to the All In podcast. It's like episode 100 something. With me again today, the Rain Man himself. Yeah. David Sachs is here. Friedberg is in his garden at his home in Paris. Spring has sprung. The queen of quinoa. And of course, the dictator himself, Chamath Palihapitiya, the silver fox. Look at that little tuft of silver hair. So distinguished.
I got a haircut from somebody recently who said that people go to her and ask her to put the silver thing in their hair.
Really?
I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, you
Friedberg looks like he's in Smurf Village there. What is that background?
That is a scene from.
Oh, okay.
Like most of my backgrounds, I think reflects the mood and the moment of the week. Yeah.
You guys just totally denied half the beta males in the YouTube comments from being able to guess what the background was. Thanks a lot.
You ruined it for them.
Well,
actually, I did a reverse image search and then I used a ChatGPT plugin to automatically figure out
I didn't know that was the game.
Background each week.
Oh, okay. All right, well, let's get started. Come on.
Let's get started. Okay, listen. Look at Sachs. Like, I gotta get out of here.
The alpha's spoken. The alpha's spoken.
Sachs feels like he's in a good mood. I like this.
Welcome to the world's greatest podcast. OpenAI launched a bunch of ChatGPT plugins, and I don't know if you saw it, but David Sachs wrote a blog post with ChatGPT. It's an amazing back and forth. I read this back and forth. Explain what you did, Sachs. This was really like one of the best conversations I've seen with ChatGPT. I'll pop it up here on the screen, but explain what you did.
Well, I had an idea for a blog post about the use of a, I guess, tactic you could call give to get. I thought it would be an interesting tactic for AI startups to use if they're trying to get a hold of proprietary training data. So, for example, if you wanted to create an architect AI, you need a lot of plans. Or if you're going to create like a doctor AI, you need a lot of lab results or medical reports to train the AI on. And those are hard to get. OpenAI doesn't necessarily have them yet. So there is an opportunity, I think, for startups to create these AIs in different, you call them professional verticals. So the give to get technique would be you give points to your users for uploading that data, and then they can spend those points by using the AI. And anyway, the company that came up with this give to get tactic was a company called Jigsaw almost 20 years ago. No one remembers this company. I'm kind of dating myself because I remembered it. But I just had this idea, I wonder if the Jigsaw approach could be used for AI startups. So I started by going into ChatGPT and I said, hey, have you heard of Jigsaw? And then it had. And then I said, tell me about its give to get, approach. And then I said, would this approach work for AI startups that want proprietary training data sets? And it said, yes, this is a good idea. And then I gave the architect example and I said, can you give me more examples like this? And it gave me like 20 more examples. And then I asked it just to flesh out various kinds of details. I went down some cul-de-sacs that I didn't use. And then at the end, I said, can you summarize everything we've just talked about in a blog post? And it gave me the first draft of a blog post. I then did a substantial amount of editing on most of the blog post, although some of it I just use verbatim. And then I had a couple of people in my firm look at it. They made some good suggestions. So it's not like the human's completely out of the loop. And then I copy and pasted my edited version back into ChatGPT, said, here's my edit. And then I asked for some suggestions. It made a few small edits. And I said, okay, great. Just incorporate the edits yourself. Gave me that final output. And then I posted on Substack. A blog that probably would have taken me a week to research and write, if I had done it at all, I was able to do in a day. And I can't see myself going back now. I think this is just how I'm going to write all my blog posts is use ChatGPT as my researcher, as a writing partner, some cases an editor, but I'm definitely going to run it through.
The thing that I was struck by was just how kind and generous and thoughtful this conversation was. And I just thought, I've never seen Sachs have a conversation where he was so kind to the other person and thoughtful. Right about now, all your friends and family are like, how do we get Sachs to have this conversation with us? You were super kind to the AI.
Because it's not a person, it was a robot.
Oh, no, I get it.
Well, just in case it takes over the world, JCal, you can't be too careful. But no, I think, listen, it's important to give the AI.
Look at he's so kind. He's like, perfect.
Look,
Thanks.
perfect.
Perfect.
Thanks.
No, I wanna-
Exclamation mark.
I've never once gotten a thanks from Sachs.
Well,
When have you
show
ever
that
used an
example,
exclamation
actually.
part?
Scroll up and show that example. The AI actually gave me some information about Jigsaw's point system. Again, the rewards that they used.
Yeah.
And it was just in text. So I said down below, hey, can you spit that out as a table? And
Boom.
it did instantly.
It's like a
perfectly.
day's work, right? Like you would have had to have an
Yes.
analyst or researcher do a day's work. It's incredible. And
Then I just screenshotted that and I made it an exhibit
but you
in
also
my blog
said thank
post.
you.
Well,
And then
yeah.
it was like delightful back to you. I mean, this is
Yes.
this
It was
is a
delightful back
road.
to me.
This is a literal road to you being a kind
Delightful
human
back to
being.
me.
Like all the money that you've spent on therapy and just trying coaching to be nice to people, you're just nice naturally to
No, I
robots.
think-
This gives me
I
hope.
think what it means-
Sachs is in a good mood today. I don't know why you're instigating him.
He's laughing. Come on, it's fun. You have to
I
admit
think
it's
this
funny,
is-
Zach saying thank you to the AI. Perfect.
This is confirmatory of what
Perfect,
we know.
thanks.
David wants to live in a set of highly transactional relationships, ideally with a machine, who can then eventually help him make him money.
Can I ask you a question though, sincerely, Sachs? What did you enjoy more? Working with your team of humans on this or working with ChatGPT?
Oh, we already
Which one
know the
was
answer.
more enjoyable for you, just personally?
Well, I think they both were. I would say that the human contributions were essential. So
Okay. But what did you
Basically,
enjoy
I-
more?
it's not about enjoyment. It's just, it's about, this is just a job to get done, but it definitely sped things up enormously. I personally find the hardest part of writing a blog is when you're staring at that blank sheet of paper and just having to like spit out the first 1,000 words.
Yes.
And it's just so time consuming to do that. But again, if you start with the first draft, even if it's not very good, then you can just edit it and
That's
it speeds things up a
ideation.
lot.
Yeah. It's great for ideation.
But the
Now, did
contributions
you
of
have to
people in my
fact check
firm
it?
were important.
Yeah.
I actually trusted it. I know that you probably should fact check it in a way because it can hallucinate, but the things that we're saying made so much sense to me that I didn't think it was hallucinating.
Well, this is a great moment to pivot into what OpenAI did with plugins. These came fast and furious this week, and a bunch of folks who had, started verticalized ChatGPT-based projects, MVPs were like, oh, maybe my project MVP is now dead because Instacart, OpenTable, Shopify, Slack, Zapier, and Zapier, obviously, like if then this, then that, is a very wide-ranging tool that allows you to connect APIs from a multitude of sources. And what this all lets you do at the end of the day is have ChatGPT ping one of these sources, just like an app might do or some custom software might do, ping the API and return data. So, hey, what tables are open on OpenTable? Maybe Shopify, find me things to buy in this category, etc. And so people have started building little scripts. We used to call these, when Magic Leap was out, internet agents. And the concept of a software agent, that's existed for a long time, actually, in computer science. I'm sure Freeberg will give us some examples of that. But also ChatGPT can now use a browser. So that means you can get around the dated nature of the content in the corpus. Somebody did things like, hey, build me a meal plan, book me a reservation for Friday night in OpenTable, source other ingredients and buy it for Saturday night on Instacart, and then use something like Wolfram Alpha to, calculate the calories, et cetera. So when you saw all this drop, Sachs, what did you think in terms of the opportunity for startups and to build these intelligent agents, things that will do if this, then that, or just background tasks over time, and you could actually leave them running?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the most important developer platform since the iPhone and the launch of iOS in the App Store, and I would argue maybe ever in our industry, certainly since the beginning of the internet. I think there was a question when ChatGPT launched on November 30th and people started playing with it in December, what exactly OpenAI's product strategy was going to be. Was this just like a proof of concept or a demo? And they even kind of called it like a demo. And initially, it looked like what their business model was going to be was providing an intelligence API that other websites, other applications could incorporate. And we saw some really cool demos like that Notion demo of other applications incorporating AI capabilities. And so initially, it looked like what OpenAI was going to be was more like Stripe, where in the same way that Stripe made payments functionality available very easily through a developer platform, they were going to make AI capabilities available through their developer platform. And then I think a funny thing happened on the way to this announcement, which is they became the fastest growing application of all time. I'm talking about ChatGPT. Over 100 million users in 2 months. Nobody else has ever done that before. I think it took the iPhone, 2 years plus. Gmail, Google, those products all took, I think, well over a year. So this became the fastest growing site of all time. And I think with plugins, what they're indicating is that they will become a destination site. This is not just a developer platform. This is a destination site. And through plugins, they are now incorporating the ability to basically, anything you could do through an application, you will now be able to do through a plugin. You'll just tell ChatGPT what you want done. If you say, hey, book me a plane ticket on this date, it will go into Kayak's plugin and do that. You say, book me a plane ticket and then an Airbnb for this trip.
So the promise of Siri and Alexa realized, because those were very rigid, they had no intelligence, right, Friedberg? If you wanted Siri to do something specific like use Waze or to go get you an open table, it needed to be pretty specific, and it didn't have any kind of natural language model behind it. So this is taking existing APIs and putting a natural language layer in front of it, which makes it, perform a little more naturally. Is that what we're seeing here, Friedberg?
I think it provides access to a corpus of data and a suite of services that are not well integrated into a search or chat interface anywhere today. So, knowing what restaurants have what seats available is in a closed service. It's in a data warehouse operated by OpenTable. And now what OpenTable can do is provide an API into that data via an interface, and they can allow ChatGPT to make a request to figure that data out, to give a response to a user, where they can ultimately benefit from transacting and allowing a service. This closes the loop between search and commerce in a way that Google cannot and does not do today. And I think that's what makes it very powerful. We've seen this attempted in a number of important ways in the last couple of years with Alexa and Apple Home and Google Home kind of integration via the chat services that they offer, where you speak to the device. But the deep integration that's possible now and the natural language way that you can go from the request all the way through to the transaction is what makes this so extremely powerful. And I think, the points I made a few weeks ago when we first talked about, search, having so many searches that are done where the human computer interface presents a table or presents a chart or presents a shopping list in a matrix, that's what makes search such a defensible product, I think could theoretically be completely obviated or destroyed with an interface like this, where you can write the ability for ChatGPT or whatever the core centralized service is to actually present results in a table, in a matrix, in an interface, in a shopping list, and actually close the transaction loop. It's really disruptive to things like commerce providers. It's really disruptive, some of these commerce platforms. It's really disruptive to a lot of different industries, but also introduces a lot of real opportunity to build on top of that capability and that functionality, to rewrite and ultimately make things easier and better for consumers on the internet.
What do you think, Chamath? You're looking at this, and it seems to be moving at a very fast pace. Over 100 million users. They put a business model on it already, $20 a month. They have a secondary business model of, hey, use the API and we'll charge you for usage. And then you layer on what Zapier and If This Then That had already sort of established in the world, which is APIs, but nobody ever really wanted to write scripts. So that seemed to be the blocker. You go into Zapier, If This Then That, it's 4 or 5% of the audience, people who want to customize stuff, people who want to tinker. But this seems to now, with the ChatGPT chat interface, open it up to a lot of people. So is this super significant, or is this a commodity product that 10 people will have if we're sitting here next year on All In episode 220?
I think you are asking the exact right question. And you used a great term. Like in poker, if there are 3 hearts on the board and you have the ace of hearts, you have what's called the nut blocker, right? Which means that nobody else, even if anybody else has a flush, they never have the best flush. And if flush is the best hand, there's a lot of ways that you can manipulate the pot and eventually win the pot because you have that ace of hearts and nobody else has it. The concept of blocker, I think, is very important to understand here, which is what are the real blockers for this capability to not be broadly available? So I think you have to segregate. You have the end user destination, you have the language model, and then you have the third-party services. And so if you ask the question, what is the incentive of the third-party service? Well, the shareholders of a travel site, right? They're not interested in doing an exclusive deal with any distribution endpoint. They want their services integrated as broadly as possible, right? So I think the answer for the service providers is just like they build an app for iOS and for Google, and if they could have justified it, they would have built an app for a gaming console. They can,
or the
they
Windows
should,
phone.
they would, they do,
Yeah.
right? So that's going to get commoditized and broadly available. I think on the LLM side, I think we've talked about this. Everybody's converging on each other. In fact, there was an interesting article that was released that said that there was a handful of Google engineers that quit because apparently Bard was actually learning on top of ChatGPT, which they felt was either
cheating?
illegal or unethical or something, right? So the point is, I think we've talked about this for a while, but all of these models will converge in the absence of highly unique data, right? What I've been calling these white truffles. So if you can hoard white truffles, your model will be better. Otherwise, your model will be the same as everybody else's model. And then you have the distribution endpoints, of which there are many whose economic incentives are very high, right? So Facebook doesn't want to just sit around and have all this traffic go to ChatGPT. They want to be able to enable Instagram users and WhatsApp users and Facebook users to interact through Messenger, what have you. Obviously, Google has many hundreds of billions of reasons to defend their territory. So I think all of this to me just means that these are really important use cases. As an investor, I think it's important to just stay a little patient because it's not clear to me that there are any natural blockers. But I do think that David's right, that it's demonstrating a use case that's important. But it's still so early. We are 6 weeks in.
Yeah, I tell you, I think there's a couple of great blockers here, or there's going to be an M&A bonanza for Silicon Valley. If you look at certain data sets, Reddit, Stack Overflow for programming, and Quora, these things are going to be worth a fortune. And to be able to buy those or get exclusive licenses to those, if you're Google Bard or if you're ChatGPT, that could be a major difference maker. Twitter's data set, obviously. And then you look at certain tools like Zapier and If This Then That. They've spent a decade building the sort of meta API. That would be an incredible blocker. I think this is going to be like a balkanization of
I'll be honest
so many
with you,
oil sources.
Zapier already did it for free. They did a plugin for free.
Exactly. I was just going to say, I don't think these are not blockers. I don't think this is the ace of hearts on a flush board. I don't think so. I think that these things are really interesting assets. They are definitely truffly in nature, but they may not be the 10-pound white truffle from Aldo that we're looking for.
But on the M&A side, don't you think this would be like incredible?
No, but the only reason I say that again is it is just so early. Like in the text, I mentioned this to you guys. I remember, and Sachs and I were in the middle of this. We were both right at the beginning of social networking. Sachs started Genie. I was in the middle of AIM. And all of a sudden, we saw Reed start SocialNet. Then we saw Friendster get started. Then we saw MySpace get started. And you have to remember, when you look back now, 20 years later, the winner was the seventh company, which was Facebook. Not the first, not the second. It was the seventh, which started 2.5 years properly after the entire Web 2.0 phenomenon started.
Yeah.
Same with search, by the way, where Google was probably 20th
Exactly.
to the scene.
Yeah, Excite, Lycos.
If you want to be
Yeah.
a real student of business history, I'll just say something that's more meta, which is if there's something that I've learned on the heels of this SVB fiasco, is that there is an enormous amount of negative perception of Silicon Valley and frankly, a lot of disdain for VCs and prognosticating technologists, right? And I think that
So
we
you
have
mean
to
this
be,
podcast?
I think we have to be very careful. Yeah, and I do think that we are an example of that because we are the bright, shiny object of the people that were successful. And the broad makeup of America thinks that we're not nearly as smart as we all think we are. And after all of this money that's been burned in crypto land and NFTs and all of this Web3 nonsense, to yet again whip up the next hype cycle, I think doesn't serve us well. So I do think there's something very important here, but I think if we want to maintain reputational capital through this cycle, because government will get involved much faster in this cycle, I think it's important to just be methodical and thoughtful, iterate, experiment, but it's too early to call it, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, it's definitely too early to call it, but Sachs, you're saying explicitly you think this is bigger than the internet itself, bigger than mobile as a platform shift.
It's definitely top three, and I think it might be the biggest ever. I think things could certainly play out the way that Chamath is saying. However, I actually think that OpenAI has demonstrated now with these platform features that it has a lead, a substantial lead, and I actually think that lead is likely to grow in the next year. And let me tell you why. I think it's got a couple of assets here that are hard to replicate. So number one, user attention. I think they've now got, I would guess, hundreds of millions of users, and this thing is caught on like wildfire. It must have been beyond their wildest dream. I think it even surprised them how much this has taken off. It's really captured the public's imagination, and people are discovering new use cases for it every day. If you are sort of the number two or number three or the seventh large language model to basically get deployed behind a chatbot, I just don't think you're going to get that kind of distribution because the novelty factor will have worn off and people will have already kind of learned to use ChatGPT. So number one is the hundreds of millions of eyeballs. Number two is with this developer platform, I think we should describe a couple of other features of it. One of the problems with ChatGPT, if you've used it, is that the training data ends in 2021. And so you very rapidly, for many questions, get to a stopping point where it says, like, I don't know the answer to that because I don't have any information about the last 2 years. Well, one of the plugins that OpenAI has introduced itself is called the browsing plugin. And it allows ChatGPT to go search the internet and not just run internet searches, but to run an internet search as if it were a human. So you ask ChatGPT a question and it goes to find, it runs a search, and then it scours through the list of 20 links and it doesn't stop until it finds a good answer. And then it comes back to you with just the answer. So it actually saves you the time of clicking through all those loops, and it'll give you the browsing history to show you what it did. That's mind-blowing. They also have a thing called a retrieval API, which allows developers to share proprietary knowledge bases with ChatGPT. So if you have a company knowledge base or some other kind of content, you can share with ChatGPT so that ChatGPT can be aware of that. And there are some privacy concerns, but the company has said they're going to sandbox that data and protect it. As an example, I'm planning on writing a book on SaaS using ChatGPT, and I'm going to put together all the previous articles and talks I've done as a database so I can then work with that in ChatGPT. So you're going to have more and more developers sharing information with ChatGPT. You're going to have ChatGPT able to update its training based on sort of the last 2 years, being able to search the internet. And I think that as those hundreds of millions of users use the product and as developers keep sharing more and more of these data sets, the AI is going to get smarter and smarter. And then what's going to happen is both consumers and developers are going to want to use or build on the smartest API.
Yeah, see, this is where
So
I
it
think
feeds on itself. I mean,
yeah, I think there might be I agree with much of what you're saying, but I do think somebody like Facebook, when they release their language model, which they're about to, is not going to allow ChatGPT to have any access to the Facebook corpus of data. And then LinkedIn will do the same. They'll block any access to ChatGPT to their data. And so then you might say, you know what? I'm doing something related to business and business contacts. I need to use the LinkedIn one. And they're just going to block other people's usage of it and tell you, hey, you have to come to our interface and have a pro account on LinkedIn. And this all becomes little islands of data. And so I'm not sure that...
You may be right, Jake Al. It's too early to have a definitive opinion, but I would say...
You have to believe plugins are going to be promiscuous.
Yes, exactly. Plugins are the refutation of your idea.
Facebook does not have an API. Twitter turned off their API. People who are smart with data sets, Quora doesn't let people use its data. So I just picked 3. Those are 3 incredible data sets that don't allow people, and Craigslist doesn't. So people who are smart do not allow APIs into their data. They keep it for themselves.
I think there were a lot of people when the App Store rolled out that swore up and down they would never build a mobile app because they didn't want to give Apple that kind of power, that the internet was open, whereas the App Store is closed and curated by Apple. And sure enough, they all, at the end of the day, had to roll out apps, even though in the case of Facebook, it definitely has made them vulnerable because they're downstream of Apple. I mean, Apple now has enormous influence over Facebook's advertising revenue because users have to go through Apple. They never had to do that before with the internet. Nonetheless, Facebook felt compelled to release a mobile app because they knew it was existential for them if they didn't. And I believe that what's happening is...
I don't think it's the right analogy. The right analogy would be Google search. Does Craigslist allow their data to be indexed inside of Google search? The answer is no, right? They block that for a reason. They will write a cease and desist letter.
Fine. So you know what? Those guys will stay out of it. But look how much content Google search already has. And I think that ChatGPT will start by eating a substantial portion of search because, again, you don't have to go through the 20 links. It just gives you the answer. It's going to eat a substantial portion of browser usage and app usage because you're just going to tell ChatGPT what you want to do. It will go book your plane ticket. It will go book your hotel room.
Yeah, see, this is
and
another
the apps
part
that want to play in this, the apps that want to play in this will benefit. So there'll be a powerful incentive for applications to get an advantage by participating. Let me finish my point.
Yeah.
And then eventually they will be forced to do it, not because they get an advantage, but because they're so competitively disadvantaged if they don't participate in that ecosystem.
I agree that they'll participate in it, but here's the thing. What's going to happen is Google's going to turn on Bard, and I've been playing with Bard. It is 80% of ChatGPT already. And then when they make Bard a default, little snippet on your Google search return page, or Bard is built into YouTube or Chrome or Android or the Play Store, they're going to roll right over ChatGPT because they have billions of users already. So this advantage that you see today, I see that getting rolled real quick because you'll be on YouTube and on the top right-hand side will be Bard. And when you do a search, it's going to say, here are other sentences you could do. Oh, you want to search Mr. Beast when he's helped people, or Mr. Beast when he's given away more money, or people who've copied and been inspired by Mr. Beast. All that's going to occur inside of YouTube. And ChatGPT is not going to have access to the YouTube corpus of data. And then when you do a search, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be on the right-hand side, and it's going to be playing just like it is in Bing. If you turn on your Android phone, they're going to make Google Assistant go right into Bard. And Google Assistant is already used by hundreds of millions of people. So I think that Google will roll. I think they're going to roll ChatGPT.
I don't know who's going to win, but I'm looking at this Saxipoo more reductively as a capitalist, which is what are people's incentives? Because that's what they'll do. Google's incentive is to usurp ChatGPT's usage by inserting something inside of their existing distribution channels to suppress the ability for you to want to go to the app.
Known as bundling.
I think Facebook has that same incentive. Oddly, even though Microsoft is such a deep partner, I think certain assets of Microsoft have that incentive. You're talking collectively about $5 or $6 trillion of market cap. Then when you add in Alexa and Amazon and Siri and Apple, what is their incentive? I don't think their incentive is to let this happen. And I think if you look at the Slack Microsoft Teams example of even a better engineered product who's excellent and widely deployed, even at hundreds of millions of users, doesn't much matter when it's more cleverly distributed and priced. And so those things, again, you may still be right. All I'm saying is it's just so early to know. And as slow and lumbering as some of these big companies are, they are not so stupid as to kill their own golden goose and or defend it when threatened. So I think you just have to let it see what happens.
I want to finish the point on Google and then we can move on to the bundling thing.
Sure.
Let me just make the counter argument, which is that I think Google was caught completely flat-footed here, even though they shouldn't have been because they published the original paper on transformers in 2017. They should have seen where all of this was going, but they didn't. OpenAI used that paper and commercialized it. And the proof of that is there was just a lawsuit a couple of days ago, or at least a claim by a former employee of Google who quit because he said that they were using ChatGPT to train their AI. So their AI is so far behind. They were violating the terms of use. Hold on. They were violating the terms of use of OpenAI to train their own AI on ChatGPT. That's not a good sign. That's not a good sign. I also think hold
nonsense.
Hold on. I mean, I'm just making the counter argument here. I mean, don't dismiss it out of hand. Give me a chance to explain it. Moreover, ChatGPT 4, which was just released a few weeks ago, we know that OpenAI had that. They were using it internally for 7 months. So the state of the art is not what we're using. It's what OpenAI has internally. They're obviously working now on ChatGPT 5. And so if you're saying that Bard is 80% of ChatGPT 4, well, I got news for you. It's probably 50% or 20% of ChatGPT 5. And who knows what the product roadmap is inside of OpenAI. I am sure that they've got 200 ideas for things they could do to make it better and low-hanging fruit. But look, regardless, I think the pace of innovation here and development is going to speed up massively. I mean, there is going to be a flurry of activity. I agree it's hard to know exactly how it's going to play out. But I think this idea that, it's a foregone conclusion, these big companies are just going to catch up with OpenAI. I think that there's a strong counter argument. That's not the case.
I'm making a very specific argument. It's not a foregone conclusion where all the value will get captured. Just like in any of these major tidal waves, if you make the bets too early, you typically don't make all the money. And it tends to be the case, and it has been in the past at least, with these transformative moves, it's sort of in the early third of the cycle is where the real opportunities to make the tons of money emerge. And there's a lot of folks that show you a path and then just don't necessarily capture the value. I'm not saying that that's going to be the case here. All I'm saying is if history is a guide, all of these other big waves have shown that fact pattern. And so I'm very excited and I'm paying attention, but I'm just being circumspect with this idea that, having been in the middle of these couple of waves before it, I made all the money by waiting a couple of years. I don't know if that's going to be true this time around, but that's sort of my posture right now.
Chamath, look, you obviously have a point because we're only 4 months in. So how can we know where this is going to be in 5 years? So you could be right.
To your point, Sachs, I think it's clear, and this is, big ups to the OpenAI team, that they will be one of the top 2 or 3 players. Absolutely. We all agree on that, which is extraordinary in and of itself. And the top 4 players, Freeberg, are obviously going to be Microsoft, OpenAI, we'll call that like whatever, that little, pairing. And then Google, Facebook. And then we haven't talked about Apple, but obviously Apple is not going to take this sitting down, and hopefully they'll get in gear and have Siri, make it to the next level, or they'll just put her out to pasture. If you were to look at those 4, and we're sitting here a year from now, who has the best product offering? Who has the biggest user base? Just take a minute to think about that, because you were at Google, and we all know the word on the street is it's the return of the kings. Larry and Sergey are super engaged by all reports. Every back channel, everybody I talk to is saying that they're every day, they're obsessed with Google's legacy now and making this happen. So what can you tell us in terms of who you think a year or 2 from now will have the biggest user base and be the most innovative amongst that quartet? Or maybe you think there's other players who will emerge?
The advantage that OpenAI has, which is the advantage that any, call it emerging, advantage competitor has, outsider, is that the incumbents are handicapped by their current scale. Much of the consideration set that Google has had in deciding what features and tools to launch with respect to AI over the last couple of years has been driven fundamentally by a concern about public policy and public reaction. And I know this from speaking to folks there that are close enough to kind of indicate, like, Google has been so targeted, has been such the point of attack by governments around the world with respect to their scale and monopoly and monopolistic kind of behavior, as some people have framed it, privacy concerns, et cetera, et cetera. The fines in the EU are extraordinary. That so much of what goes on at Google today is, can I get approval to do this? And so many people have felt so frustrated that they can't actually unleash the toolkit that Google has built. And so they've been harnessed and focused on these internal capabilities. I think I mentioned this in the past, but things like, what's the right video to show on YouTube to keep people engaged? What's the right ad to show to increase click-through rates, et cetera, versus building great consumer products for fear of the backlash that would arise and governments coming down on them.
Can they shake this?
And ultimately attacking the revenue and the core revenue stream. And this is no different than any other kind of innovator's dilemma. Any other business of scale in any other industry historically ultimately gets disrupted because their job at that point is to protect their cash flow and their revenue stream and their balance and their assets, not to disrupt themselves, especially as a public company, especially under the scrutiny and the watchful eye of governments and regulators. So I think Google has, in aggregate, probably good competitive talent, if not better talent, than OpenAI and others. Google has arguably the best corpus of data upon which to train, the best capabilities, the best toolkit, the best hardware,
biggest user
the
base,
lowest cost for running these sorts of models, the lowest cost for serving them, et cetera, et cetera. So frankly, they're way behind. The battle is theirs to lose if they are willing to disrupt themselves. And this is the moment that Larry and Sergey should wield those founder shares that they have. And they should wield the comments that they wrote in that founder's letter, that they will always make the right decision for the long term for this company, even if it means taking a cost in the short term and disrupting themselves. This is the moment to prove that those founder shares were worth, the negotiation to get there. And I think that it is going to require a real degree of scrutiny, a real degree of regulatory uncertainty, a real degree of challenge by governments and public policy people, and perhaps even a revenue hit in the near term to realize the opportunity. But I do think that they're better equipped to win if they chose to.
Well said.
Well, really well said. And I think the founder share insight is particularly interesting, Sachs. The fact that they fought for those and did nothing with them. Go ahead, Shimon.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the exact same thing. It's like, if they don't use it now, what would it take and when?
Yeah,
and yet another case of the emperor has no clothes. Just a power grab by Silicon Valley execs, which was meaningless, because if in this moment you don't wield that power and break that company into bits as you need to, what was the point of having it?
They need to come in and say, we're going to give barred results to 10% of users and ask them to give feedback on it. Because who has more queries than, just one point I want to make there for Friedberg, who has more reinforcement learning than Google? That search box is everywhere, and people write question after question, and Gmail.
And Google Docs, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, they have so many people asking questions, and YouTube might be the transcripts of YouTube
the transcript
alone,
of every video and the image of every video.
Bananas.
Yeah.
And the comments under it. The comments under the video. You have the transcript of what happened in this video, and then what was the question and answer underneath it.
Let me make the counterpoint.
Please.
To my own point, look at how Gerstner came after Zuck. So Zuck had his point of view, his strongly held belief that AR or VR was the future of the platform. That's what he wanted to bet into. That's what he wanted to lean into. It's what he wanted to build the company against. He did it. And then the financial analysts and the investors came at him and said, this is a waste of money. Focus on making money. You have a responsibility to shareholders. F those founders' shares. You don't deserve that 10x voting right, or whatever the framing might have been to get him to say, you know what, I acquiesce. I'm giving it up. And I think that we should also think about what's going to happen on the other side. Google is a $1 trillion+ market cap company. Their shares are owned by every public endowment, public pension fund, institutional investor owns Google in their portfolio. So the backlash against Google making a hard bet like this and potentially destroying billions of dollars of cash flow in the process every year will not be easy to do. That the same sorts of letters that Gerstner et al., and obviously we love Gerstner and we can all defend him all day long, at Zuck is what may end up happening with Alphabet if they did choose to go this path.
Sachs, what do you think here about the founder share, specifically in Google's chances of disrupting themselves and, just putting this into every product and shoving it down users' throats and catching up?
Well, I mean, with all due respect to Larry and Sergey, I mean, they've been on the beach a long time.
That's a lot of beach time.
This reminds me of Apollo Creed coming out of retirement in Rocky IV.
Did a lot of shape.
A lot of fanfare, but yeah.
They could be a little out of shape.
Sam Altman may not look like Ivan Drago, but this is one shrewd character.
He's fit.
This is one shrewd character.
Yeah.
I mean,
Altman is fit.
he's fit.
He's been in the arena.
Yeah, he's a multi-time founder who sat at the top of YC and got to see everything that worked.
Yep.
And got to see all
Brilliant
the research.
strategist.
And he's been plugging away at this for 8 years. So there's a big, I just think there's a big gap to catch up on. Now, Google has all the resources in the world, and they've got a lot of proprietary assets too, and they've got all the incentive in the world. So do I think that Google will be one of the top 4 players in AI? Absolutely. But this idea that it's going to come and steamroll OpenAI, I'm not buying it.
I got a prediction. Within next year, Larry and Sergey take the title of co-CEOs, and then they do a demo day where the two of them get on stage and they actually do the demos of these products. If that happens, that's
fictional pontification.
That's it. Listen, and Bezos is going to run for president. Those are my 2 predictions. I'm taking a lot of predictions. Can you imagine if Larry Freeberg, what are the chances of Larry and Sergey taking co-CEO slots? That's prediction 1. And then prediction 2, what are the chances of them running the next Google I.O. where they get on stage and they walk people through all the products that they shepherded and that they have a vested interest in and that they want to demo?
There is an institutional problem at Google at the top level, which does need to be solved, which is this position of constantly being in defense against the scrutiny, again, of regulators and public policy folks and all these different groups that are against Google. And so as a result, the kind of cultural seasoning, particularly at the executive and the board level, has been one of protect the nest, don't overreach, don't overstep. And it's a real, I think one for the business school books or whatever, ultimately is what they end up doing about it. Because now is, the time when that defensive posture is really kind of putting the entire business at risk.
The same thing happened to Microsoft, remember, in the late 90s?
That's right.
When they got crushed by that antitrust lawsuit. It made them very defensive.
Well, but that consent decree...
They had a wartime CEO come in, Ballmer came in, and, followed by kind of an innovative guy who could kind of continue to build. And I think that there may be a moment here. I love Sundar. He's a great guy, great CEO. Sundar and I don't know if I ever told you this, he and I started at Google on the same day. We were both in the same nuclear class. We wore the friggin' hat on the TGIF day and on stage. He was a product manager and now he runs the company. But I think the question is whether it's the CEO or the broader whole kind of executive org or the board, a degree of disruption necessary to shift that cultural seasoning is so necessary right now for them to have a shot at this. And similar to what you just said, Sachs, you're going to need a Ballmer type moment to kind of, reinvigorate that business. And by the way, I'll tell you...
More of a Satya moment, I think, than a...
More of a Satya moment.
Well, yeah, because it's an important point. When Ballmer took over during that period after Gates, when they were on their heels, he basically just focused on revenue and paying dividends and stock buybacks, and the stock went sideways, and he missed mobile. And now...
Yeah, it's a good point, Jacob. Yeah.
Well, wait, you're forgetting one big thing, which is that was also because he had to operate under a consent decree to the DOJ.
Exactly.
So the product managers of Microsoft were replaced with lawyers from the Department of Justice, and you had to get their sign-off before you could ship anything. So we have to remember that those things probably slowed Microsoft down as well. And the great thing that Satya had was a blank slate and the removal of that consent decree. So he was able to do everything that just made a lot of sense. And he's executed flawlessly. I think the problem at Google is not Sundar or Larry or Sergey. I think it's more in the deep bowels of middle management of that company, which is that there's just far too many people that probably have an opinion, and their opinion is not shrouded in survival. Their opinion is shrouded in elite language around what is the moral and ethical implications of this, and where has this been properly tested on the diaspora of 19 different ethnic tribes of the Amazon? That's the kind of decision-making that is a nice to have when you are the second or third most valuable technology company in the world. But you have to be able to pause that kind of thinking and instead get into wartime survival mode. And it's very hard. So it doesn't almost matter at this point what Sundar wants. The real question is, what is the capability of middle management to either do it or get out of the way? And I think that in all of these big companies that struggle, what you really see is an inability for middle management to get out of the way, or frankly, just you need somebody to then fire them. And if you look at folks who get their groove back, let's see what Facebook does. What are they targeting? They're targeting middle management. If you look at what Elon does in the companies that he owns, there is virtually no middle management. It's like, get out of the way.
Build product.
Build product and ship it.
Yeah.
And what is the core truth? And so if failure is there in front of you, and if David is right that you have 200 million users come out of nowhere who are voting every day with their time and attention to use an app, and that doesn't create a five-alarm fire where you get middle management out of the way and you are the senior most people talking to the people doing the work and shipping things every day, you are toast. You are toast.
A lot of people are starting to think we're moving a little bit too fast when it comes to OpenAI's incredible performance with ChatGPT 4, the plugins and all this. And so the Future of Life Institute, which was formed in 2015, it's a nonprofit that's focused on de-risking major technology like AI. They did a petition titled Pause Giant AI Experiments, an open letter. A bunch of computer scientists signed this letter. And the letter, quote, says, we must ask ourselves, should we let machines flood our information channels with propaganda and untruth? Should we automate away all the jobs, including the fulfilling ones? Should we develop non-human minds that might eventually outnumber, outsmart, obsolete, and replace us? Should we risk loss of control of our civilization? A number of notable tech leaders like Elon, Steve Wozniak, and a handful of DeepMind researchers have signed it. What do you guys think of the letter? Are we going to slow down or not? And then we could ask the question generally, how close are we getting to AGI, which is what everybody's scared of, is that these agents start working with each other in the background to do things that are against human interest. I know it sounds like science fiction, but there is a theory that when these AIs start operating on their own, like we explained in the previous sort of segment here with plugins, and they make agents that are operating based on feedback from each other, could they get out of control and be mischievous and then work against human interest? So what do you think, Sachs?
I think there's a difference between what could happen in the short term and then what could happen in the long term. I think in the short term, everything we're seeing right now is very positive. And let me just give you an example. There was a really interesting tweet storm about a guy who wrote about how ChatGPT saved his dog. Did you guys see this? This was one of the really mind-blowing ones to me, use cases. So his dog was sick, took him to a vet. Vet prescribed some medication. 3 days later, dog's still sick. In fact, even worse. So the owner of the pet just literally copied and pasted the lab result for the blood test for the dog with all the lab values into ChatGPT and said, what could this be? Like, what's your likely diagnosis? ChatGPT gave 3 possible answers, 3 illnesses. The first one was what the vet basically had diagnosed with. So that wasn't it. The second one was excluded by another test. So he then went to a second vet and said, listen, I think my dog has the third one. And vet prescribed something, and sure enough, dog is cured, saved. So that's really mind-blowing that even though ChatGPT hasn't been specifically optimized, as far as we know, for lab results, it could figure this out. The reason I'm mentioning this is it gives you a sense of the potential here to cure disease, to, like I could see major medical breakthroughs based on the AI in the next 5 or 10 years. Now, the question is, like, what happens in the long term, as the AI gets smarter and smarter, and we are kind of getting into the realm of science fiction, but here would be the scenario is you're on ChatGPT 10 or 20 or whatever it is, or maybe some other company's AI. And the developers ask the AI, hey, how could you make yourself better? Now do it, which is a question we ask ChatGPT all the time in different contexts. And so ChatGPT will already have the ability to write perfect code by that point. I think, code writing is one of of its superpowers already. So it gives itself the ability to rewrite its code, to auto-update it, to recursively make itself better. I mean, at that point, isn't that like a speciation event? Doesn't that very quickly lead to the singularity if the AI has the capability to rewrite its own code, to make itself better? And, won't it very quickly write billions of versions of itself? And, it's very hard to predict what that future looks like. Now, I also don't know how far away we are from that. That could be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever. But I think it's a question worth asking for sure.
Is it worth slowing down, though, Sachs? Should we be pausing? Because based on what you've said, and I think you've framed it properly, when these things hit a certain point and they start reinforcing their own learning with each other, they can go at infinite speed, right? This is not comparable to human speed. They could be firing off millions, billions of different
I think you're right.
Scenarios.
We're definitely now on this fuck around, find out curve.
Yeah.
And so there's only one way to really find out, which is somebody's going to push the boundaries. The competitive dynamics will get the better of some startup. They'll do something that people will look back on and say, whoa, that was a bridge too far. So yeah, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I think we're not going to slow down. I actually think it's going the other way. I think things are going to speed up. And the reason they're going to speed up is because the one thing Silicon Valley is really good at is taking advantage of a platform shift. And so when you think about like all the VCs and all the founders, everyone accuses us of being lemmings. And so when there's like kind of like a fake platform shift or people kind of glom onto something that ends up not being real, everyone's kind of got egg on their faces. But the flip side of that is that when the platform shift is real, Silicon Valley is really good at throwing money at it. The talent knows how to go after it, and they keep making it better and better. And so that's the dynamic we're in right now. You look at 70% of the last YC class was already all AI startups. I'm sure the next one will probably be 95%. So I think that we're on a path here where the pace of innovation is actually going to speed up. Companies are going to compete with each other. They're going to seek to invent new capabilities. And I think the results are going to all be incredibly positive for some period of time. Like, the vet example, we're going to cure illnesses. We're going to solve major problems.
So if they're positive, then we invest more, we trust more. But the paradox of that, as Chamath is pointing out, Freeberg, is if we trust it more, we invest more, then some person in a free market is going to say, you know what? I need to beat ChatGPT. Therefore, I'm going to take the rails off this thing. I'm going to let it go faster and take off some constraints because I need to win. And I'm so far behind. How do you feel about that scenario that sort of Chamath and Sachs teed up, Friedberg?
I think there's like GPT-3, I think ran on 700 gigs. Is that right? Does anyone know what GPT-4 runs on? It's got to be on some number that's, not many multiples of that. But look, someone could make a copy of this thing and fork it and develop an entirely new model. I think that's what's incredible about software and digital technology, and also kind of, means that it's very hard to contain. Similar to like what we've seen in biology, ever since biology got digitized through DNA sequencing and the ability to kind of express molecules through gene editing. You can't control or contain the ability to do gene editing work at all because everyone knows the code. Everyone can make CRISPR-Cas molecules. Everyone can make gene editing systems in any lab, anywhere. Once it was out, it was out. And now there's hundreds of variants for doing gene editing, many of which are much improved over CRISPR-Cas9. I use that as an analogy because it was this breakthrough technology that allowed us to specifically edit genomes, and that allowed us to engineer biology and do these incredible things where biology effectively became software. And remember, CRISPR-Cas9 gave us effectively a word processing type tool, find and replace. And the tooling that's evolved from that is much better. So whatever is underlying, whatever the parameters are for GPT-4, whatever that model is, if a close enough replicant of that model exists or a copy of that model is made, and then new training data and new evolutions can be done separately, you could see many, many variants kind of emerge from here. And I think this is a good echoing of Chamath's point. We don't know what's ultimately going to win. Is there enough of a network effect in the plugin model, as Sachs pointed out, to really give OpenAI the sustaining competitive advantage? I'm not sure. The model runs on 700 gigs. That's less data than, fits on my iPhone. So, I could take that model, I could take the parameters of that model, and I could create an entirely new version. I could fork it, and I could do something entirely new with it. So I don't think you can contain it. I don't think that this idea that we can put in place some regulatory constraints and say it's illegal to do this, or, try and, create IP around it or protections around it is realistic at this state. the power of the tool is so extraordinary. The extendability of the tools are so extraordinary. So the economic and the various incentives are there for other models to emerge, and whether they're directly copied from someone hacking into OpenAI servers and making a copy of that model, or whether they're open sourced, or whether that someone generates something that's 95% as good and then it forks and a whole new class of models emerge. I think this is it's, as Sachs pointed out, highlighting the kind of economic, market uprooting, social uprooting potential, and many models will start to kind of come to market.
What do we think the impact of white-collar jobs getting annihilated by this technology, if that in fact comes to pass?
I want to say one thing on this. Yeah, look.
Let me just share. Can I just give one example here? So here's a Reddit post that I was made aware of earlier this week. I lost everything that made me love my job through Midjourney overnight. I am employed as a 3D artist in a small games company of 10 people. Our team is 2 people, he basically explains. He says since Midjourney version 5 came out, he's not an artist anymore, nor a 3D artist. All they do is prompting, photoshopping, and implementing good-looking pictures. And he basically says this happened overnight, and he had no choice. His boss also had no choice. He says, I am now able to create, rig, and animate a character that's spit out from MJ, Midjourney, in 2 to 3 days. Before, it took us several weeks in 3D. The difference is that he cares about his job, and for his boss, it's just a huge time money saver. He's no longer making art. And the person who was number 2 in the organization, who didn't make as good content as him, is now embracing this technology because it curries favor with his boss. And he ends basically saying, getting a job in the game industry is already hard, but leaving a company and a nice team because AI took my job feels very dystopian. I doubt it would be better in a different company also. I am between grief and anger, and I am sorry for using
my gosh,
your art, fellow artists.
This is yet another reason that Figma really needs to close this acquisition from Adobe. I mean, it's like the value of these apps are just getting gutted. If you take a workflow management tool for things like design and imagery and you reduce it by an order of 90%, it's like, what is that app experience worth? And how could you replicate it if you were a big company that already has distribution? That's one comment. But what I would tell you, Jason, to answer the white collar question is I think there are a handful of companies you need to look at exclusively because they will be the first ones to really figure out how to displace human labor. And that is TCS, so Tata Consulting Services, Accenture, Cognizant. These are all the folks that do coding for hire work at scale. I think Accenture has something like 750,000 employees. So the incentive to sort of squeeze OpEx, to create better utilization rates, to increase profitability is quite obvious. It always has been. They will be the first people to figure out how to use these tools at scale before the law firms or the accounting firms or any of those folks even sort of try to figure out how to displace white collar labor. I think it's going to be the coding jobs, and it's going to be the coding for hire jobs that companies like Accenture and TCS
So those business processing
do for other people.
Developer kind of folks, they're going to need half as many people, 25% as many people.
We're going to find out the efficient frontier.
Yeah.
I see it a different way. I mean, this argument that productivity leads to job loss has been made for hundreds of years, and it's always been refuted. When you make human beings more productive, it leads to more prosperity, more wealth, more growth. And so, yeah, it's easy to think about in a narrow way that jobs are going to be displaced, but why would that be? It's because you're giving leverage to other human beings to get more done. And some of those human beings, really anybody with a good idea, is now going to be able to create a startup much more easily. So you're going to see a huge explosion in creativity, in startup creation, new companies, new jobs. Think about the case of, Zuckerberg founding Facebook at Harvard. He wrote the first version himself, maybe with a couple of friends. That project happened and turned into a giant company because he was able to self-execute his idea without needing to raise venture capital or even recruit employees, even really before forming a company. Anyone with a good idea is going to be able to do that soon. You're going to be able to use these AI tools. They truly will be no code. You'll be able to create an app or a website just by speaking to some AI program in a natural language way.
So more flowers will bloom, more startups will bloom, more projects.
Now,
but wait a second,
it will create, I think, a lot of dislocation. But for every testimonial that is like the one that you showed, which I think is, I'd say, a little bit overly dramatic, I have seen 10 or 100 testimonials from coders on Twitter or other blogs talking about the power that these new tools give them, they are like, this makes me a 10x engineer.
Right.
And
Exactly.
and especially these like junior engineers who are right out of school who don't have 20 years of coding history, they get superpowers right away. Like it makes them so much better.
The proper response from this. Hold on. Wait, hold on.
Let me give you a response to that guy. So, and using Sachs's point, that guy's saying what used to take me weeks, I can now do in 2 to 3 days. And I feel like my work is gone. And that's because he's thinking in terms of his output being static. And if he thinks about his output being dynamic, he can now, in the matter of 3 weeks, instead of making one character, he can now make a character every 2 days. So he can make 30 characters in 3 weeks. That's an alternative way for him to think about what this tooling does for him and his business. The number of video games will go up by 10x or 100x or 1000x. The number of movies and videos that can be rendered in computers can go up by 10x or 100x or 1000x. This is why I really believe strongly that in some period of time, we will all have our own movie or our own video game ultimately generated for us on the fly based on our particular interests. There will certainly be shared culture, shared themes, shared morality, shared things that tie all these things together, and that will become the shared experience. But in terms of like us all consuming the same content, it will really, like with YouTube and TikTok, we're all consuming different stuff all the time. And this will enable an acceleration of that evolution and personalization. I'll also highlight, back in the day, one human had to farm a farm by hand. And we eventually got the tool of a hoe and we could put it in the ground and make stuff faster.
Excuse
and then
me?
we got a plow and then we got a tractor. And today, agricultural farm equipment allows one farmer to farm over 10,000 acres. You go to Western Australia, it's incredible. These guys have 24-row planters and harvesters, and it's completely changed the game. So the unit of output per farmer is now literally millions of times what it was just 150 years ago.
And in that case, Freeberg, nobody wants to do backbreaking labor in the fields, and everybody wants to have cheaper food. But in this case, let me just read you one quote that I didn't read in the original reading of this. He says, "I want to make art that isn't the result of scraped internet content from artists that were not asked." And so I think that's part of this, is that it's bespoke art. But the one question I had for Sachs was, Sachs, we started this conversation with saying, hey, this is different than anything in terms of efficiency that came before it. This is, I'm going to put some words in your mouth here, but this is like a step function, more efficient. So to the argument of, hey, efficiency has always resulted in, more ideas and we've found something to do with people's time. Is this time different potentially because this is so much more powerful? This isn't just like a spell checker.
I would say differently. I think, and I agree with what JCal is saying, because I think that the thing that technology has never done is tried to displace human judgment. It's allowed us to replace physical exertion of energy, but it has always preserved humans injecting our judgment. And I think this is the first time where we're being challenged with autonomous systems that has some level of judgment. Now we can say, and it's true, again, we're 4 months in, that judgment isn't so great. But eventually, and because of the pace of innovation, eventually it's probably not that far away, the judgment will become perfect. I'll give you a totally different example. How many pilots are there in the world? Will we, at some point in the next 10 years, want folks to actually manually take off and land? Or will we want precision-guided instrumentation and computers and sensors that can guarantee a pitch-perfect landing every single time in all kinds of weather conditions, so that now planes can even have 50x the number of sensors with a computer that can then process it and act accordingly? Just a random example that isn't even thought of when we talk about sort of where AI is going to rear its head. I think that this judgment idea is an important one to figure out, because this is the first time I've seen something that is bumping up against our ability to have judgment. And what this person was talking about in this Midjourney example is his judgment has been usurped.
Yes.
Yeah, I would disagree.
Well, I don't know
so,
about that.
let me just make one point on this. So, an image is a matrix of, data that's rendered on a screen and as pixels, and those pixels are different colors. And, that's what an image is.
Is it, or is it the judgment of the creator?
Well, no, I'm just saying an image in general. So like when Adobe Photoshop and digital photography arose, photographers were like, this is, BS. Why are you digitizing photography? It was analog and beautiful before. And then what digital photography allowed is the photographer to do editing and to do work that was creative beyond what was possible with just a natural photograph taken through a camera. And they're arguably different art forms, but it was a new kind of art form that emerged through digital photography. And then in the early 90s, there was a plugin suite called Kai's Power Tools that came out in Adobe Photoshop. And it was a third-party plugin set. You would buy it, and then it would work on Photoshop. And it did things like motion blur, sharpening, pixelation, all these interesting kind of like features. And prior to those tools coming out, the judgment of the digital artist, the digital photographer, was to go in and do pixel by pixel changes on the image to make that image look blurry, or to make it look sharper, or to make it look like it had some really interesting motion feature. And the Kai's Power Tools created this instant toolkit where in a few seconds, you created a blur on the image. And that was an incredible toolkit, but a lot of digital artists said, this is automating my work. What is my point now? Why am I here? And the same happened in animation when CGI came around and animators were no longer animating cells by hand. And in every point in this evolution, there was a feeling of loss initially, but then the evolution of a whole new art form emerged, and an evolution of a whole new area of human creative expression emerged. And I think we don't yet know what that's going to look like with respect to what we're seeing here.
Do you think the level of judgment that AI offers you is the same as the level of judgment that Kai Power Tools offered you?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that the person making the judgment or the decision about which pixel to change into what color felt like, I have control. And I think it's ultimately like a sense of control.
I disagree with you. I mean, I think that this
is... it's a magnitude different. I'm with you,
it's more than a magnitude different.
Yeah. It's a whole different
Power
level.
Tools, it's still it's on you.
You and I have sat in spreadsheets many times, and
I'm generally happy with this idea. So I'll give you a different example. Today, we use radiologists and pathologists to identify cancers.
Yep.
There are closed-loop systems. We have one right now that's in front of the FDA. That is a total closed-loop system that will not need any human input. So I don't know what those folks do. Except what I can tell you is that we can get cancer detection basically down to a 0% error rate. That is not possible with human intervention. That is judgment.
Right.
So I just think it's important to really acknowledge that this is happening at a level that it's never happened before. You may be right that there's some amazing job for that radiologist or pathologist to do in the future. I don't know offhand what that is, but these are closed loop systems now that think for themselves and self-improve.
I get it, but I think that there's an unfathomable set of things that emerge. We did not have the concept of Instagram influencers. We did not have the concept of personal trainers. We did not have the concept of like all these new jobs that have emerged in the past couple of decades that people enjoy doing, that they can make money doing, that is a greater kind of experience and level of fulfillment for those that choose and have the freedom to do it than what they were having to do before when they had to work just to make money.
What do you think that radiologist or pathologist wants to do? Be a trainer or Pilates instructor?
No, I think we don't know what that's going to look like. I think you're having the same,
You have any thoughts on this as we wrap this topic? It's obviously a lot of passion coming out here with the elimination of white-collar jobs in a massive way.
I think that this is a short-term versus long-term thing. In the short term, I see the benefits of AI being very positive because I don't think it's, in most cases, wiping out human jobs. It's just making them way more productive. You still need the developer. It's just that they're 5 times or 10x more productive. But I don't think we're at the point in the short term where you're going to be able to eliminate that role entirely. And what I've seen in basically every startup I've ever been a part of is that the limiting factor on progress is always engineering bandwidth. That is always the thing that you wish you had more of.
Totally.
It's the product roadmap is always the most competed on thing inside the organization. Everyone's trying to, get their project prioritized because there's just never enough engineering bandwidth. It's really the lifeblood of the company. So if you make the developers more productive, maybe it just accelerates the product roadmap. I don't think in the short term that what's going to happen is these companies are going to look to cut all their developers because 1 or 2 of them can do 10 times the work. I think that they're going to try and accelerate their product roadmaps. Now, again, you have this long-term concern that maybe you don't need developers at all at some point. But I think that the benefits of developing this technology are so great in the short to midterm that we're going down that path no matter what. And we're just going to have to find out what that long-term really looks like. And maybe the long-term will look very different. I mean, Once
No,
once we get past the short term, we may have a different long-term view.
I think in this narrow vertical, I 100% agree with you. Look, I think that AI is going to eliminate unit testing. It has already done so. It's going to eliminate most forms of coding. The engineers that you have, all of them will now become 10x engineers. So with fewer of them or with the same number, you'll be able to do as much or more than you could have before. That's a wonderful thing. And all I'm saying on that specific narrow vertical is you'll see it first rear its head in companies like Accenture and TCS and Cognizant, because they have an immediate incentive to use this tooling to drive efficiency and profitability that's rewarded by shareholders. It'll be less visible in other companies. But what I am saying, though, is that you have to think about the impact on the end markets for a second. And I think that AI does something that other technology layers have never done before, which is supplant human judgment in a closed loop manner. And I just think it's worth appreciating that there are many systems and many jobs that rely on human judgment, where we deal with error bars and an error rate that a computer will just destroy and blow out of the water. And we will have to ask ourselves, should this class of job exist with its inherent error rate, or should it get replaced fully by a computer which has no error rate? And I think that's an important question that's worth putting on the table.
Yeah, okay, so let's wrap here. I just have my final thought on it is like, you're going to see entire jobs, categories of jobs go away. We've seen this before: phone operators, travel agents, copy editors, illustrators, logo designers, accountants, sales development reps. I'm seeing a lot of these job functions in the modern world, like phone operators previously. I think these could wholesale just go away and they would just be done by AI. And I think it's going to happen in a very short period of time. And so it's going to be about who can transition. And some people might not be able to make the transition, and that's going to be pain and suffering. And it's going to be in the white collar ranks. And those people have more influence. So I think could lead to some societal disturbance. I do agree with you, Sachs.
I'm going to learn Pilates and be an influencer.
That's it. But I do agree with Sachs that the software development backlog, if this is what you're saying, is so great that I don't think we'll see it in software development for a decade or two. There's just so much software that still needs to be made. All right, last week we talked about TikTok and this first bipartisan hearing we've seen in a long time. And people actually, I think, framing correctly exactly how dangerous it is, in my opinion, to have TikTok in the United States. And of course, then we get the great disappointment of the actual bill. The RESTRICT Act was proposed by Senator Mark Warner, Democrat, Virginia, on March 7th. The problem with it is it seems like it's poorly worded, that there will be civil penalties and criminal penalties to Americans for breaking the law and using software that's been banned. And many people said, this probably is just bad language.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does this apply to incognito mode? Because if it doesn't,
incognito
I don't care.
mode is not.
Yes.
This would basically.
No, they're saying that you can get, you can get fined or 20 years in jail or whatever it is for using a VPN to TikTok.
Freeberg, what are your thoughts on it?
Look, I think this is a real threat to the open internet. I'm really concerned about the language that's been used that basically speaks to protecting the safety and security of the American people by actively monitoring network traffic and making decisions about what network traffic is and isn't allowed to be transmitted across the open internet. It's the first time that I think in the United States, we are seeing like a real threat and a real set of behaviors from our government that looks and feels a lot like what goes on in China and elsewhere, where they operate with a closed internet, an internet that's controlled, monitored, observed, tracked, and gates are decided by some set of administrators on what is and isn't appropriate. And the language is always the same. It's for safety and security of the people. The entire purpose of the internet is that it did not have bounds, that it did not have governments, that it did not have controls, that it did not have systems that are politically and economically influenced, that the architecture of the internet was and always would be open. The protocols are open. The transmission of data on that network would be open. And as a result, all people around the world would have access to information of their choosing. And it allowed ultimate freedom of choice. This kind of is the first of what I'm concerned creates a precedent that ultimately leads to a very slippery slope. Saying that TikTok cannot make money in the US by charging advertisers or managing commerce flows is one thing. That's where the government can and should and could, if they chose to, have a role. But I think going in and observing, tracking internet traffic and making decisions about what is and isn't appropriate for people, I think is one of the things that we all should be most concerned about what's going on right now. There is no end in sight to this if you allow this to happen in the first time. VPNs, virtual private networks, allow you to anonymously access internet traffic and access internet traffic via remote destinations. So that the ultimate consumption of content that you're using can't be tracked and monitored by local agencies or ISPs. And I think that saying that can now be restricted takes away all ability to have true privacy and all rights to privacy on the open internet. So I'd love to talk about this more. Unfortunately, I got to run. But
great seeing
this
you.
is a super threat to me. And I think this is something we should be super, super concerned about, and that the entire community of technology, internet, and anyone that wants to have freedom of choice steps up and says this is totally inappropriate and overreach.
Yeah.
There are other ways to manage stuff like this.
Feels like complete overreach, Sachs.
Yeah,
Do you think this is
I agree
just
with this.
intentional overreach or poorly written or somewhere in between? What do you think?
Both. I think both. I think this is the biggest bait and switch that Washington, the central government, has ever tried to pull on us. Everybody thinks that they're just trying to ban TikTok from operating in the U.S. And if that's all they did, then I think the bill would be supported by most Americans. But that's not what they're doing. They're not restricting TikTok. They're restricting us.
That's not the goal here. Yeah. What a bait and switch.
It's a huge bait and switch. And so just so you know, what the act provides is that a U.S. citizen using a VPN to access TikTok could theoretically be subjected to a maximum penalty of $1 million in fines or 20 years in prison or both. Now, they'll say, Mark Warner, the sponsor of the legislation, will swear up and down that's not the intent. But the problem is that the language of the bill is so vague that some clever prosecutor may want to pursue this theory one day, and that needs to be stopped. Also, there's another problem with the bill, which is you think this is just about TikTok. It's not. What they do is, it says here, I guess they don't want to mention TikTok by name, so they're trying to create a category of threatening application. But because it is a category, it's very, very broad. So the bill states that it covers any transaction, not just an app, in which an entity described in subparagraph B has any interest. And then entities described in subparagraph B are, quote, a foreign adversary, an entity subject to the jurisdiction of or organized under the laws of a foreign adversary, an entity owned, directed, or controlled by either of these. And then it gives the executive branch the power to name a foreign adversary, any foreign government or regime that one of the cabinet secretaries defines without any vote of Congress. So this is giving sweeping powers to the executive branch to declare foreign companies to be enemies.
This feels like the plot of the prequels in Star Wars.
Well,
Emergency
like
powers,
said,
here we go.
we criticize China for having a great firewall. What do you think this is?
Yeah, I mean, this should obviously have nothing to do with the American consumer and everything to do with a foreign adversary collecting data of Americans at scale. This could be written in a much simpler way.
Yeah, you know what it should be? It should be one sentence, which is that app stores are prohibited from allowing TikTok to be an app in their store. That's what they do in India. That's it. Yeah. Case closed. Yeah. Game over.
I think India's doing okay, right? They block like 100 Chinese apps, and I think their society's still functioning. So, all due respect to AOC, like the idea that 150 million Americans are going to suffer because they can't be tracked by the CCP is kind of nuts.
This is going to give sweeping powers to the security state to surveil us, to prosecute us, to limit our internet usage. This is basically the biggest power grab and bait and switch they've ever tried to pull on us. And again, if they really were concerned about TikTok, it's one sentence.
Yeah, we were done. All right, everybody. It's been an amazing episode for the Sultan of Science, David Freeberg, the Rain Man himself, David Sachs, and the dictator, Chamath Palihapitiya. I am the world's greatest moderator, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
We'll let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sachs.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, Bestie. Queen of Quinoa. Besties are back.
That is my dog taking a notice in your driveway.
My haberdasher will meet me at Clinton. We should all just get a room and just have one big huge orgy because they're all just useless. It's like this sexual tension that they just need to release somehow.
Wet your beak. Wet your beak.
fee.
What? We need to get merch.
Besties are
I'm
back.
going all in.